Welcome to OpenHive.JS, the podcast for all things JavaScript. We are your hosts.
I am Matteo Collina.
And I am James Snell.
It is much easier today to contribute and create a new project. It is so much easier, and I think that is something that I've really valued in how GitHub has been doing things. And I think that really helps sustain open source a lot more and make it more accessible.
In this episode of OpenHive.JS, we are talking to Liran Tal, developer advocate at Snyk and a member of the Node.js security working group, about his passion for the open source community, ways to engage in maintaining projects, and the real cost of open source.
I find it easier, I think, when people just flash out, a feature request, and if you ask them, if you'll say, I, totally support it. If you want to send a PR, I'll happily merge it. They just need that confirmation from you as the maintainer. They're coming from the outside. It's a bit more frightening and scary for them on how to get started, how to do things. And so part of those things, I will just go off and, straight off, if I find it valuable as well, I will just say, I'll support you if you want to lend a PR, I'll happily merge it in.
Let's get to it. Welcome to another episode of OpenHive.JS from NearForm.
Hi everyone, I am Matteo Collina, and we are here at OpenHive.JS, our podcast on all things JavaScript with NearForm guests. I'm joined today by my colleague James Snell and our guest Liran Tal for a chat about empowering and fostering open source involvement and collaboration. Welcome, Liran, to OpenHive.js. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, Matteo. Hey, James. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm Liran Tal. I'm based in Israel. It's mostly sunny the part of the year. I'm really fascinated about open source. I've been so since my early childhood with Linux. So that's kind of like been my theme around, my technical achievements and, career things that I've been doing. And day-to-day stuff. I'm today doing developer advocacy for Snyk. So that's a short bit about me.
Thank you, Liran. James, what's your mind?
Just thinking about open source, thinking about all the various projects and stuff that we're all involved with, and how we maintain those, how we encourage folks to contribute to it, and how do we keep up with it? Like Matteo, I know you're involved in
a little bit
rid of these.
To be honest, I'm involved in a little bit too much stuff at this point. I don't know. As well as you, James, I don't know.
So the question, kind of the question on my mind, how can we, how do we maintain these projects? How do we, grow involvement in a project, right? How do we encourage a community to build around it? And just kind of curious what your thoughts are on that, Larry.
So this topic, I think one of the things that clicked for me a while back, probably a few years back, was with regards to like open source and maintenance. I think was the prominent example of Sinresource. I mean, he is maintaining probably thousands of npm packages, hundreds of projects that are probably the most active. And it to be honest, it's what there was a point where it was like completely blowing my mind. How can you maintain that to like a level where everything is well addressed, well maintained, community is welcomed, you still keep on maintaining those projects actively and successfully, and how do you do that at the rate, at a scale of having so much project going on? And granted, a few years back, I think Sinresource is still without a bigger family. But even when I think about myself, even without kids, that's a whole lot of investment. And I know that Stinray is doing that as like a full-time open source developer. But still, if you think about a scale of projects needing to like the context switch required, that is something that is still I appreciate that so much in terms of how someone can just keep up with it. So I think that has been something that have been on my mind. Like, how do you make projects successful in those kind of like situations?
There's just this constant back and forth, kind of, it's especially for someone that does have family. Like, I have 4 kids altogether. Till which here,
Bless them.
and I, yeah, and I made the decision a while ago that it's like I'm not gonna work on the weekends, right? And I limit my time, and then I ends up strictly limiting the amount of actual open source stuff that I can do, right? Limiting the number of projects. So some of these folks that have so many projects, I mean, just like Matteo here, right? Yeah, Matteo, in terms of how you balance your time, right? I mean, how do you decide?
So it's actually very interesting. Most of my open source, so I divide my time on two main blocks. One is, so I have some open source time, like NearForm sponsor a little bit of my time for doing open source. So I'm working on NearForm clients as well as internal stuff, as well as open source. On top of that, I put in some significant amount of hours of my own time because I really enjoy it. Overall, I divide my open source time into more or less two main blocks. One, or maybe three, but one is essentially bugs and bug fixes and generic maintenance, stuff that I don't need myself. And everybody that has collaborated with me on any sort of project will know that my default answer for any sort of bug is, would you please send a pull request? Yep. Thank you. That's my main answer. Like, it's your bug, not mine. I don't care.
I do like that.
Hmm?
I do like that. I like that those series of tweets on Twitter that you're always
I'm just things. Not my bug. Like, it's your application that's using my code for whatever reason, and then it's your responsibility to fix it. Okay, I'm not necessarily going to fix it for you. Mm-hmm. If you are paying, yeah, totally. Like everybody that is working with us as clients for NearForm knows that we go long lengths to get all possible bugs fixed. But people that are not, like, generically, it's your bug. So whoever is using it in real world products, whoever is making money and profiting out of it, should be responsible to fixing those bugs.
Yeah, I think it's an important point because there's so many projects that start just as a developer, just scratching a personal itch, and how they're using it. This bug may not be actually important, right? Or in supporting some other enterprise, some other company, making money off of their code is not something that they had originally intended when they published the source for a particular model.
True. I mean, it just evolves and grows over time, and sometimes it gets to a point where it's quite different from the use case that you intended it to be.
Yeah, I know that there are some modules. I think some of the happy modules, and and some others that are out there, they kind of just take this point of view that this isn't supported, right? Or if you want to support, you're going to pay for it. Yes, we publish the source code, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to entertain your
support requirements,
right? And it's interesting to see the contrast of those. When we talk about how like some projects like Node, where we want to actively go out and build this broad community of contributors and users and all this kind of stuff. And we deal, at one point, I think we were dealing with something like 90 pull requests a week in Node, versus other projects where it's just like, you know what, I don't want to support this unless you're paying me. Right?
Yeah, we're not even there yet with companies, sponsoring, like generic companies sponsoring their work on open source. We're not even there yet.
The first question I kind of have written down here, is kind of how can we grow an open source project beyond its main maintainer? And this whole discussion, just kind of implies that for a good percentage of these projects, we actually don't, right? Do we need to build a community of contributors to every open source project? Or is it okay if it's just a single maintainer, if that's what that maintainer wants?
I mean, for me, I can share a story. So I was going to, I think it was a company named Payo in Israel, and they invited me to talk a little bit about, my experience in open source. And one of the tips I gave them in terms of how do you grow, to be a scalable model for open source was that for projects where I see people actually like contributing pull requests or being involved in triaging specific bugs and so on, what I usually do is, I try to be very welcoming, very onboarding them, saying thank you and all of these things. And what I would usually do when I want to support, get someone on the project is I'd go ahead, ping them that I'd be happy if they join the project as a collaborator to help maintain it. And I'll send them like an actual invite as well. So like they have both and they can decide if that's what they want or not. And I share that experience there, and it actually worked for like quite a few times that I tried it off. So people actually did get more involved, did create pull requests to like fix some of the open issues and so on. It's like a very easy way for me to then scale off, beyond just myself maintaining something. But what happened after this talk is like they also asked me to come in because they maintain quite a few open source projects that I wanted to like get a grasp of how other people's are doing it. And so what happened is after I shared this kind of secret with them, they one of the maintainers of the other projects was just pinging me, asking me if I want to be added to their project to help maintain it. So it was funny just how things kind of shift around. And of course they added me, and I've been trying to be active and follow up, but it's not exactly my cup of tea in terms of the project itself. So I've been slowly just tracking it. But this is a way that has been working for me in terms of how do you grow a project
Yeah,
beyond me as a single maintainer.
I can confirm. Like one long time ago, started. I decided I was going to build a web framework. I was very frustrated with the options that were there from a technical point of view and a community as well. So I ended up saying, well, I want to build one, but I'm not going to build one alone because it's way too much work for a single person. So the way I've started building that framework was literally to pitch this idea to people up until somebody was actually willing to pick it up and start doing work. And essentially, I started building the community before building the framework itself. So, and I said to myself, I won't start development until I have another person that wants to put some time and work with me on that journey.
Right.
So fast forward 3 years, we got Fastify V3 coming in a few weeks. To some extent, we are going to be RC1. I think this at the point of the recording. So maybe when this is out, it's probably out. I don't know.
Amazing.
So and we have more or less about 10 collaborators, people like which are community where people fix their own bugs. So it's essentially they know if they report, they were going to get answer asked, please fix it. So that's the key fundamental piece of the community. So it's to some extent a self-support type of situation, and it's working. It's a little bit more sustainable than other models that I've seen not working or working in the other in the rest of the ecosystem.
I mean, it really is fantastic. Fastify is a really good example, I think. It does raise a question. So far, all of the conversation we've had, here the past few minutes has been focusing on bugs, right? I found a bug; it doesn't work. I need to fix it. What about feature requests, right? And how are those different? Are those things handled differently than a bug, right? When I'm talking about, hey, this thing does X, Y, Z right now, but I want it to do A, B, C also, right?
Yeah, I find it easier, I think, when people just flash out a feature request, and if you ask them, if you'll say I totally support it, if you want to send a PR, I'll happily merge it. I find it that most people will actually confirm their like intention and will actually follow up and will put a PR, or will say I'll take a few days and try to work on it. So because I think what they need is like that motivation boost, that if you see it as something that will get merged, and they want to be part of the project, part of the community, part of whatever it is being built here, they just need that confirmation from you as the maintainer that they're coming from the outside. It's a bit more frightening and scary for them on how to get started, how to do things. And so part of those things I will just go off and straight off, if I find it valuable as well, I will just say, I'll support you if you want to lend a PR, I'll happily merge it in.
It's pretty nice I would say, because it's very similar to what I do. So I ask them to, if it's a complex feature, I ask to more or less write a plan and then go implement it. Most of the time, though, I have on my project on Fastify and other bit, most people don't. So it's I don't have stats, but it would be good to collect stats on this. But my take is maybe 80% say no, and
Really?
20% say I'm going to do it. The best ones are, oh, this is a nice feature to have, and then I said, well, would you like to implement it? Oh no, I don't have time.
I wonder if that's
So
related to like the complexity involved also with some of these features.
if you want to do a feature, if you plan to do a feature request and you're not willing to put in the time and
or pay for it to be done, yeah.
or paid for to be done, probably it's never going to happen. There is on an edge case on most of my project, which is if I think it will truly benefit the project, and I believe it will be mostly impossible for anybody else but me to do, then we'll probably go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
And this has been that's a case throughout most of my open source.
I was just thinking that one approach that I've been kind of just stewing on in the back of my head is for when for fairly large projects, when these feature requests do come in, it would be really interesting to have the ability to assign a dollar amount to it and say, okay, if you don't want to do it yourself, right, it'll cost this much to do. So if I can get sponsorship, if I can get some funding to do it, then okay, right? But just be upfront about it and say, okay, it's going to take this much time, so it's going to cost this much.
Now that I'm thinking about it, I think even like a monetization wouldn't be enough of like a sentiment that for me I will go like motivation boost for me to go and work on it, just because it's not we're gonna get paid as like as something that is part to a salary or something like that. So it's more about the time of day that I have. Just like you said, James. Weekends are for kids and stuff like that, and so your time of day of working on something is pretty is pretty set and fixed. And if you're giving attention to Fastify, and maybe a node pull request or something else that you have on your mind, will need to get pushed back a bit off. So I think for a lot of things, like even if people will open 10 feature requests and people will put, or companies will put money behind them, I don't think that I will be able to like attend to them at all, just myself. Like that's why I would want others as well as part of the maintenance work, because I'd be happy to if others want to help out, and so we kind of scale out my time with someone else also working on the project.
Anytime we start talking about other people, bringing other people into our project, we immediately have to start talking about culture, processes, tooling, things like this to kind of make it easier. So what kinds of culture, processes, tooling are most effective, right, in maintaining these projects?
For me, I think it's the number one thing that I've seen useful that helps both me and others is the fact that the projects are well tested. So I have this one project which I'm really proud of with a CLI thing called Dockley that helps you kind of like manage containers, Docker containers on the CLI, and has its terminal user interface. But when it started out, I was running it a few years back, and I was thinking, well, I don't know if that's gonna fly out or just a fun project I'm gonna do. And I, as it always happens, I completely, dedicated more and more time to it, and it grew and also became a bit popular. But then I never took the time it needed to add tests for it. So anytime someone wants to add something, I need to sometimes just run some manual tests and see that something is well working, not breaking anything else. And for others, I need to ask them when they add a pull request, sometimes ask them as well themselves to check it and see that things are working. So I think having a testing strategy is not something that only helps beyond. I think we're all agreeing on the testing side, but it's not just a technique just for technical debt. It also something that helps you give confidence when others want to add more functionality or fix a bug. And so both them and you have this confidence, that nothing is, or like a lower chance that something is broken, and they have this confidence when the pull request, just gets green. So, they have this idea of like, well, maybe now he will merge it or she will merge it because, it's already, green and so on. So I think that is something that, as an open source project, if you are, going to welcome new maintainers, and if you expect to maintain it in the future, having testing is a well way to onboard people beyond the technical debt and the other strategies around it.
I have a few things to say about this.
I knew you would.
Didn't expect anything else.
This is a topic that's very close to my heart. So I started contributing to one of my first open source project that I started contributing to was the MQTT library. And the unit tests in that library have a nice property. They might pass or they might fail.
It's an amazing property.
It's an amazing property that's completely unrelated to the correct extension of the code. And the reason is when doing network things, it's actually, you might rely on timers, you might rely on a bunch of different things that make things not super testable. And the architecture of those tests is actually pretty bad on its own. So you need also to, when you choose like which framework am I going to use to test my library, that also has some impact on the longevity and how you will get people to contribute to that to the library itself, because it's essentially that MQTT is completely unmaintainable. There's a few people now that are trying to take it over, and they're having some hard time in making the test pass in the first place.
Yeah, sounds like you're stuck on the same problem I am.
Yeah, essentially. So that's it. So test isolations, feature isolation, everything. Try to isolate as much, lower the minimum amount of share state as possible between tests. Do not rely on shared components and all a bunch of other things. So yeah.
So how about linting? I mean, there's so many different opinions about this, and so many people just have, should we use semicolons? Should we not use semicolons? And standard versus, ESLint or whatever. How important are those tools, and are the differences between those tools important at all?
I like using formatting, so anything like prettier or linters is useful for me because when working in a team, and I try to view a project as if a team was working on it, because then it helps me plan it to all of these scalable things that we have to support in terms of community and everything else. And so when I read a bunch of code from someone else, I want to read it as if I was reading it. And so that's where everyone set on the same a style guide, the way that prettier does helps me do that. So I like it. But I will say this other thing, and that is when other people are coming into the project, if you're not setting up things correctly, or they may just use some IDE and editor that doesn't support that kind of linters and code style guides, etc. What happens is they may mess up the formatting, and what you get is usually those pull requests that they added a feature or fixed something and they did an amazing job, but at the same time they messed up the whole linters, and maybe they'll catch it when they do a pre commit hook things to the push. Maybe they'll catch it on the PR itself. Maybe you'll have to remind them about it. But it's always like a downturn when trying to contribute something and you change the whole style guide. Probably in accident, but you end up doing it. One thing that I've found useful, I'm sure other IDs have it, but VS Code has this action that allows you to save a project without formatting it. And I've even been doing that for the node thing for contributing a doc change now. So I know that I'll press the Command S. I'll go ahead and save it with formatting. So for all of those projects that I have this one-off contribution for, I'll usually do this just shortcut command on save it without formatting, and make sure I'm not introducing any formatting changes into the code base itself when I'm doing a PR.
Yeah, I think the issue that it really adds is just talk about friction of the pull request, right? How difficult is it to get that that bug or that new feature implemented without having to worry about all the other cruft around it, right? The testing or the linting or the
Yeah.
style guides. If we can automate as much of that as possible, right, then we reduce that friction and allow you to focus more on the actual code that's being implemented.
Yeah, which exists. ESLint has this minus minus fix tag, and Prettier has this formatting as well. So I'm using Husky and some of these hooks, and all of these have this like pre-commit step where they will add the automatic fixes and the Prettier formatting. So like even if you don't have Prettier on the IDE, it's part of like the dev project, so it will run anyway. And most chances that it will catch whatever it can, which is hopefully most of it indeed. And send that formatted in the proper way.
So just kind of thinking through, we're creating this culture, we're putting these processes in place. What is the most important component that creates an environment where new contributors can be successful in the project? Is it about the tooling, or is it more about the personal interaction between them?
Yeah, I'd have to say it's the human side of it, right? It's even if you have a great, all the tests required, all the automation around it, all the processes are there, but maintainers, would lack the inter, the intersocial connectivity to just connect with humans, listen to their problems and stuff, and engage in a proper manner. It's not going to help. So I think the human side here, and I think being more empathic to users, with whatever they bring up in the project is probably a key success factor. Which I'm saying this, but also I'm reminding myself of this person called Dinosaur Vols, and I think he doesn't get the A+ on intercommunication skills, but still that project flourishes. So it's probably a bit more complicated than just that.
I remember, it's a story I've told a few times that, when I first started getting involved with Node, about 2013, was not part of the project yet anyway. I found a bug in one part of it and had reported it, and was promptly told that I did not know how this kind of code worked. It really kind of drove home how you communicate with the folks that are trying to communicate with you can really make or break a project. And a lot of the community issues that we saw with Node at that time, were very reflective on that communication style. And in 2015, when I got involved again, right around the time we launched the foundation, I was noticing that every time somebody came, from outside the project, came up with an idea like, "Hey, let's do this," it was just an automatic no. Just no, that's locked. No, we can't do that. We can't touch this. We can't do that. And it was just very, very negative, and there was very little growth in the project. I know some would say, some could probably argue today that there might be too much growth, right? There might be too much might potentially be changing. But we've really been able to flip that conversation on its head, by making it kind of a default. If you're willing to put the work in, then yes, we can talk about it. We can, it's something that can be worked on. So, just kind of thinking through it a little bit more, the sustainability is big. I mean, we've talked about kind of process, right? But how do we make that process sustainable over time? Most of these contributors are doing, they're making these contributions in their own time. They're not being paid necessarily to work on open source, or they may be using the open source during their day job, but their employer's not actually paying them to make improvements to it, right? How do we, what are the strategies that we need to start looking at to make open source sustainable over time?
So it's very hard to get money to collaborate to open source maintainers. And the reason for that is like open source maintainers, even though you give them money, they might not have the bandwidth to do the work. And the money, in order to, you need to make enough money to leave your job to some extent, right? So it has this flip on and off situation where it might not be for everybody. So it makes also financial planning and life very hard, especially if you have family or commitment. So I'm not a true sustainer of giving developers money. It's helpful in certain cases, and for people that need them. Like there is a few people that are freelancers, or anyway, they do courses, they are content creators to some extent, using a broader term. And for those people, direct money contribution is actually very helpful, and a strategy for integrating their intake. So that's a good one. But overall, I think it's not for everybody, and a lot of people still want the safety of a job to some extent. And because of this, you need to educate the companies that if they're using open source, they need to go and fix their bugs. And if they relies a lot on their code, on the code of that is available in the community, then they should be take a stab in maintaining that code as well.
Yeah, that's a big one for me. I can't stand it when a company is deriving value from open source, but then turning around and completely refusing to contribute back to that project, or contribute, in some way to the community around it. It's like, I'm not talking about paying for it. I'm talking about contributing back, in some way, whether you're helping triage issues or writing documentation, or some other kind of valuable contribution. If you're a company that's using open source, you have an imperative to contribute back to it.
Yeah, I agree with both.
Sneak is leverages open source a lot, and it's actually one of the things I really like about the company is that they do actively go out and do these kind of contributions. Is there kind of any kind of company policy around it, or is it just kind of cultural, or how is that addressed at a corporate level?
It's a good question. I mean, we are pretty big right now, but the growth has been immense in the last year. So if you take 1 year back, or 1 year and a few months, the company has been around something like 30, 40, 50 people. So that's a very small startup. And with the recent growth, we've hitting some numbers around 200, 300 kind of employees now. So I think outside the company looks much bigger, and it is it got bigger. There's amazing growth. But yeah, like you can imagine that when it was 30, 40, 50 people, it's really hard to also put that as part of the agenda. It's super important. Some people internally have already voted in terms of not voted, voiced is the right term, have voiced their intention for us to sustain more open source. So there's some of us are active on the Node Foundation security group, so trying to be more active there and influence as much as we can on the company time as well. There are some other initiatives generally going on, but there hasn't been yet a formalized company policy, and I'm hoping that this will be something that we'll be able to push in soon as well.
Nice. So the one question I would have, the kind of the final question I would have for the both of you, is if not money, right, or in the absence of more companies stepping up to contribute to these projects, what is one thing that you'd like to see in terms of improving the sustainability of open source in the community?
So I think if it was something else, I think generally what GitHub has been doing, I think for most people who have been, where GitHub has been the default experience for them, the recent, years, in the last couple of years, it seems very obvious. But, for me, I've been doing open source for a long time. And before that, my project used to live on SourceForge, which, I don't know if a lot of the listeners actually, remember what that is. But if you think about it, the move from SourceForge to GitHub as a philosophy, as what is going on, and how do they enable people to kind of like develop and put things more in the open in the public domain, is an amazing gap that they have just breached on. I mean, it is much easier today to contribute and create a new project. It is so much easier, and I think that is something that I've really valued in how GitHub has been doing things. And I think that really helps sustain open source a lot more, and make it more accessible. Like, for example, for me, for a lot of times, I will, if I need to make small edits, I will just use the GitHub UI to just edit the file in place and add my add my updates to it. So I don't need an IDE. I don't need Git local install. So I think GitHub is actually, in terms of the functionality and the features that they add, they actually make it more sustainable and more easier for others, developers and maintainers alike to take part in it. And I like that. I really value this approach.
Very cool. Matteo, did you have any final thought?
I want to say something a little bit different, and it's whenever you are what is missing, and exactly how things should be perceived is how management thinks about open source. So, and how management thinks about giving back to the tech community. So I would say that is the major point of view. So it's that is the major gap, and in essence, we have been educating management in a bad way, and part of this is our fault. If you look into the year 30 years ago, 20 years ago, if you wanted to build software, you needed to pay money. You were paying money for your IDE, you were paying money for your libraries, you were just paying money. And open source has won by making all of that free to some extent. And it has completely superseded all those business models. Like, think about what Borland was doing, in fairness. And or what Microsoft has been doing, which in order to be able to win again the developer community had to build a free editor, where they were selling Visual Studio for like $1,000 or something per seat per year or something like that. So it's to be honest, we have educated managers to think that software is free. However, it's not. So because it's not, they need to think that there is a price to pay, which is a different price than what they were using before in terms of licenses and fees. It's more a price on, well, I need to allocate a few people on maintaining this and that. So that's my take. So it's more or less starts from the top up, and a company. This is true for companies at any size, to be honest. So, but especially the largest and more profitable organizations. And or cloud companies make a ton of money, and most of them do not share much back.
Yeah, I think that's probably the one thing that bugs me the most about the messaging, that hey, it's open source, we can use it for free. It's just entirely the wrong way of thinking about it, because it's not free. I mean, you may not have to pay licensing costs, but there are costs. So I'm gonna ask you, just a completely different question, different topic, kind of thinking forward over the next couple months. I know we're all just kind of disrupted and doing things differently and different habits and stuff right now. Liran, what is one thing, like, over the next month, 2 months, that you really want to do, just personal, outside of software, outside of open source?
Walk outside with my son, I guess, because I've been on lockdown for like four weeks, or I legitimately lost the track of time. But I think just meeting people would be number one.
Just getting out and enjoying, yeah.
Yep.
Thank you, Liran, for being our guest.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
This has been another episode of OpenHive.JS, the podcast for all things JavaScript from NearForm. Join us next time for more insights into the open source and JavaScript communities. Until then, thank you for listening.